Hi students, today we are going to discuss the poem Crossing the Bar written by Alfred Lord Tennyson. Crossing the Bar, an elegy written by British poet Alfred Lord Tennyson, is a poem focusing on the transience of life and the finality of death. Lord Tennyson was a poet of a Victorian period and remained the poet laureate of Great Britain and Ireland during his lifetime. He is well celebrated to this day for his short lyrics. Crossing the Bar was written in 1889 when the poet was visiting the Isle of Wight and published in a volume Demeter and Other Poems. He was 80 years old at the time and was shown with a severe illness from which he eventually recovered. The illness, however, made the poet ponder on death as he himself was very old and nearing his time. He uses the metaphor of crossing a sandbar to represent death in this poem. He died 3 years later, and although he wrote a few more poems, he requested that all of his poetry volumes be entered with this poem. Thus, the poem is an important one and it can be seen as Alfred Lord Tennyson's choice of his final words. Now let us see something about what metaphors and symbols he uses in this poem. Tennyson uses the metaphor of a sandbar to describe the barrier between life and death. A sandbar is a ridge of sand built up by currents along a shore. In order to reach the shore, the waves must crash against the sandbar, creating a sound that Tennyson describes as the moaning of the bar. The bar is one of the several images of liminality in Tennyson's poetry. In Ulysses, the hero desires to sail beyond the sunset. In Tithonus, the main character finds himself at the quiet limit of the world and regrets that he asked to pass beyond the goal of ordinance. The other important image in the poem is one of crossing, suggesting Christian connotations. Crossing refers both to cross over into the next world and to act of crossing oneself in the classic Catholic gist of religious faith and devotion. The religious significance of crossing was clearly familiar to Tennyson, for in an earlier poem of his, the knights and lord of Camelot crossed themselves for fear when they saw the Lady of Shalott lying dead in her boat. The cross was also where Jesus said, "Now as Tennyson himself dies," he evokes the image again. So too does he hope to complement his metaphorical link with a spiritual one. He hopes that he will see Pilate face to face. Now, let us read the poem and we will discuss stanza wise. The first stanza: sunset and evening star, and one clear call for me, and maybe there no morning of the bar when I put out to sea. The poem begins with the speaker describing the atmosphere. He says it is sunset and the evening star can be seen in the sky. Someone is calling the speaker. It is a clear, unmistakable call. It is the call of death. The speaker believes that his death is close. It is interesting to note here the imagery the poet presents before us at the start of the poem: sunset and evening star. Sunset and evening star represent the end of the day. Just as the day is about to end, the speaker says that his life is drawing to end as well. Here the poet uses his famous metaphor of crossing the bar, describing death as an act of passing beyond life. The word bar here means a sandbar. A sandbar is a geographical structure which forms around the mouth of a river or extends from a spit by slow deposition of sediments carried by the current over millions of years. The structure forms a kind of barrier between the water inside and outside The poet uses the sandbar as a symbol of death, with a water inside representing his life and the water beyond representing the afterlife. He wants to put out to sea without the mourning of the bar. The poet wishes his death to be without pain and without mourning. Now let us see the second stanza. But such a tide as moving seems asleep, too full for sound and form, when that which drew from out the boundless deep turns again home. Through the poem, the poet Alfred Lord Tennyson compares his impending death to crossing bar. In the stanza, the speaker of the poem talks about the inevitability of death. The poet wishes that when he puts out to sea, that is, when he dies, let it be like a ride which seems asleep as it moves. The speaker wants his death to be smooth, like a calm sea wave which is too full for sound and form. The speaker hopes that his death will be silent, smooth and quick and make no fuss. In the subsequent lines, the poet uses the example of the river and the sea to express the kind of death he wishes for himself. The water from the sea evaporates and turns into clouds. These clouds bring rain, entering that water into the river, and these rivers to flow, carrying their water and eventually pouring it into the sea. They thus complete a cycle, and the water turns from where it came. Just so the speaker, considering himself like the water, says that he is returning from where he came. The boundless deep here apparently stands for the sea, and in an allegorical sense to the place the poet believes he will go to after his death. Here we should notice that this stanza is a strict continuation of the idea introduced in the first stanza. The last lines of the first stanza together with this one makes up the meaning of this verse. Now let us see the third stanza. To light and evening bell, and after that the dark, and may there be no sadness of farewell when I embark. In the third stanza, the poet again resorts to describing the atmosphere to convey his inner feelings. It was sunset when the speaker started the poem, but now it is twilight. The sun has already gone down the horizon and the dusk is settling. The speaker can hear the evening bell tolling. It is an indication that the night is approaching. Then after a while, it gets dark, it is night. The poet here uses twilight to show us the state of his life. Just as the day has ended, his life too is about to end. Here twilight stands for sadness, darkness, and the grief portray the speaker's miserable state before his death. The speaker expresses his hope that there will be no sadness of farewell upon his death. The sadness of farewell is ambiguous and can mean both the speaker's own sadness as he departs from life, or the sadness of the people whom he leaves behind and who are saying farewell to him. However, we think the former is more relevant. Again, Lord Tennyson writes, when I embark, to convey the idea of the speaker's death. Thus, it is evident from the word embark that death is not seen as a final destination by the poet, but rather as a new beginning. Now let us go to the third stanza. For thou, from out our bourne of time and place, the flood may bear me far. I hope to see my pilot face to face when I have crossed the bar. In the previous stanza of the poem, we see the speaker's positive attitude towards death. It is seen to be exemplified in his final stanza of the poem. We understand that the speaker has accepted the reality, inevitability of death. He appears to have made his peace with the idea of his fast approaching death. He says that he will be beyond the boundaries of time and place, and the flood of death will carry him far away. This is going beyond the reach of this world. The speaker suggests that there is a place beyond our time and space where he hopes to go after his death. We are thus acquainted with the poet's belief in afterlife. These final lines of the poem are shrouded in illusions and hidden meanings. Firstly, we are told that the speaker hopes to see his pilot face to face when he will have crossed the bar. Here the word pilot is direct reference to God. Lord Tennyson has peculiar ways on religion. On one hand, he disapproved of Christianity, while on the other, we see wide use of religious things and ideas in his works. Since God is considered to drive the world and all living things, we see the pilot reference of the divine world in this poem. Also, the use of the word crossed is interesting. While it might simply be a word to suggest crossing the bar, it is speculated that it might be a reference to Christ, as crossed is similar in the sound to both Christ and cross. If so, then we find another allusion from the poem to religion and afterlife. The poem thus ends on a positive note, with the poet both accepting the finality of death and hoping to meet God in the afterlife. See the explanations also, it is given there in your textbook. You can directly read it from the textbook, and even the themes which are referred here. It is a life and death. The main theme that is referred in this poem, that is life and death and hope. These are the main themes that is referred in this. You can have a detailed reading of a textbook, both the poem and your workbook, and be clear with the meaning. If my explanation is not enough, you can comment on it and I will clear your doubts. So that's for today. Thank you.